He went through a time that most people in the comic book field went through. He went through that 50s time when comic books were attacked and EC Comics disappeared.
And the big turn in his life was the Ringo Starr ad.
He captured the essence of Ringo Starr. It's marvelously done, the technique. And sure enough, Frank's phone rang again. This time the phone was ringing from Hollywood, and they wanted him to do movie posters.
He did movie posters that were more like colored drawings, cartoons. And we saw those. And that's the way sort of we expected him to come back. We didn't expect these oil paintings. That was like blow away.
With the movie stuff, that's important for a couple of reasons. One is it provided a bridge somewhat between what he was doing for Al Cap, working on Little Abner as an assistant, and it sort of foreshadowed his future work. Some of the fantasy elements and the beautiful watercolor work was in that early movie poster stuff. One movie poster provided, 100 times the payment of anything he might have done for comics.
I remember taking pictures of the first check, $3,000 or $4,000. I went right out, bought a new color TV, big tiger couch, a big Black Panther chair, and that was a lot of money. I guess back in the 60s, 64, 65.
When I was doing them for the United Artists and people like that, they said, "Oh, don't ever try to draw realistic. You're the best at this." Well, that's when I went into, I got serious. I said, well, some nerve. And I started drawing realistic.
I did it all, and it's just that there didn't seem to be a market back in the 40s and 50s for artists who painted. Unless you painted westerns or detective novels, that seemed to be the only game in town. And I loved fantasy and that sort of thing. There was no way to do it except in comics. So that when suddenly the paperback field turned around and suddenly was introducing fantasy, I suddenly saw a market for what I like to do. And that's when I made the step.
So in 1962, Frazetta was given the job of working on Tarzan and the Lost Empire, which was the very first Tarzan book that Frazetta did a cover for. And he was paid very, very little. I think he was paid $150. He was not allowed to keep the original. And Frank said, all of a sudden, I started getting more and more fan mail. And the more fan mail that came in, the better I made the covers.
Frank ended up in sort of a rarefied atmosphere where his covers were so potent that they alone could sell the books regardless of what was on the inside.
He could drag you across a store and make you pick up that book.
Frazetta has a wonderful way of composing a cover which, you don't know, just seeing the book cover, whether it has anything to do with the story. But it captures this sort of archetypal, character or moment in a drama.
When you've read a certain caption in a book, a title in a book, and you have this vision in mind of what that scene might be like, Frank is one of the only people that I think actually made it better than what you envisioned in your mind.
Because we'd spent so many hours poring over the paperbacks. I finally remember when I was looking at the paperback so hard, I said, he did it with dots. Right, look, there's little dots there. And Steve Hickman would say, those are the printing dots, I think. Oh, yeah, probably.
I used to go back and rip off the covers of the paperbacks in the stores when I was a kid. I just kind of walk in, rip the covers off and stick the books in the back of the shelf and walk out with a pocket full of covers. So from the time I was really young, it's the stuff I was attracted to.
And then my friend goes, hey, look at this. Whips out Reign of Wizardry with the hands up like this and the face and this and all those demons flying out. And of course, we're just in this store full of all kinds of magazines and books, all kinds of other people there. They don't exist anymore. We're in that world, just sucked right into that cover because that's what he could do.
Right after about a year and a half, Lancer called up. Well, they offered me all kinds of things, so I ran right over to Lancer. I was a dope. I didn't realize you could just go anywhere and, get work.
The publisher said they were frightened by my early paintings, that they're not red enough or bright enough or yellow enough. And everything out there, there's an awful lot of competition out there, and everybody's trying to get louder than the next guy. And my argument was that mine will stand out because it's so different.
At a certain point, the publishers began to call up and say, Frank, if you got any paintings, just send them to us. We'll pay you your usual fee, and we'll find a book to fit the painting. And I can't think of any other artist that has ever happened to.
He was free to do what he wanted to do, which is pretty unusual for an illustrator. Fortunately for him and for the publisher, what he was doing, what he preferred doing, was exactly what the publisher wanted, and the public.
The period from about 1962 to 65, there's a period where he was publishing Tarzan drawings for Canaveral Press. And they're almost like Japanese ink paintings, where he watered down the ink and he changed the levels of contrast and tonality.
I think most artists respond to the pen and inks more because they recognize the subtlety and the ability, just the manual dexterity that goes into the brushwork, which is probably the finest I've ever seen.
Looking at the line drawings, I think it becomes obvious that there's a certain vitality to the compositions that nobody else has. They're almost in movement even when they're in repose. Somehow those characters live.
Well, one of the drawings is a picture of 3 pterodactyls attacking a saber-toothed tiger. It's a world unto itself as these 3 pterodactyls are just kind of swirling and embroiling and attacking the saber-tooth. And the expression on the saber-toothed tiger is fear from entering battle and yet savagery, thinking that, how dare you do this to me? Well, I'm going to show you what a saber-tooth can do.
I'm a big fan of the Doubleday Burroughs material, as opposed to the Canaveral plates, which I think are a little too strokey, too much unnecessary detail.
It wasn't until I was 30 or so that I really decided that I was going to paint. So that's when I started, really. Before that, I didn't do anything, except a few doodads here and there.
Well, when Frank's work began appearing on Eerie and Creepy and the various companions to famous monsters of filmland, they were so dynamic that other artists felt they had to try to live up to his standards, but no one has really ever reached the elevation of Frank Frazetta.
Imagine, just imagine, once you see what Frank was able to do, what was hidden for all those years. Oh, terrible, in a way, terrible. But not so terrible that it didn't finally happen. Bam! Came out. Total explosion.
Dracula and the werewolf, and then it was
traditional stuff.
You know, the monster, and then the ape, and then there was this, and then all of a sudden there was that sea witch. Where'd she come from?
And after that, the winged terror thing of the guy fighting off the pterodactyl thing.
Absolutely terrific.
Up until that time, everything had to be so thoroughly enmeshed in Roman or Greek culture, and Frank did something completely different with that cover, and it made me want to look for other works by him.
Even though, as Bernie said, he wasn't really all that keen on horror as a subject, he showed us nightmares and horrors that we'd never ever imagined as kids. That just scared the Jesus out of us.
Oh, those covers, they're classics.
When I first saw Frank Frazetta's work was back in the early 60s, and I was working on a book on the history of American illustration, and I was considering a lot of different artists for inclusion in it, and Frank was still too early in his career at that point, and by the time I had a chance to do a second revised edition of the book in the 80s, I was certain to include him.
Up until the time that Frank started making a condition of his commissions, the return of his originals, artists didn't get their artwork back. It belonged to the publishers. It was the Frazettas that changed it for the best for everyone.
One thing I knew enough to keep my paintings. That I knew. And for that alone, that makes you rich if you want. If you want to get rich, you got rich.
The first Frazetta sketches were placed on the market in the early 1970s. They sold for $35. Now, a great Frazetta sketch will sell for $10,000. His watercolors have sold for up to $50,000. His oil paintings have sold for up to $250,000. But that gives you an idea of the scale. As the art market has gone up and down, the price for Frazetta originals has continuously gone up.
By me saving, and it's the originals, oh boy, that's worth a fortune.
Well, we didn't think about it in those days. You know, that was the thing. You know, who thought that the originals would be worth anything? If I had thought that my original would be worth something, I would have said, hey, I want them back.
I was there with De Laurentiis, drew hundreds of thousands of dollars at Frank to buy Catgirl, and Frank turned them down. You should have seen his face. He went apoplectic. Yeah. Dino wanted Frank's Catgirl, threw hundreds of thousands of dollars at Frank, and Frank said, no, I like picture, I like picture. One Italian to another, Dino's like, I like pictures.
By the time he'd established himself, he could have been painting anything. He could have been painting abstract art, he could have been painting illustrative art and been showing in galleries and gone the fine art route. He stayed with what we call commercial art because he chose to, and I absolutely believe that his work transcends the genre.